So I don't talk about it much on this channel, but I'm actually a really big fan of classic Star Trek, especially the movies that took place after the series and followed the adventures of the regular crew. During the movie series, they introduced us to a lot of new characters. One of the main characters that they introduced us to is Lieutenant Savick, a young Vulcan officer who was fresh out of the academy under Spock's tutelage, as he had kind of returned to the academy to groom the next level of Starfleet officers. So she was pretty much his prized pupil. He was eyeing her as kind of the next generation, his heir apparent, to take over even his position aboard the Enterprise. She proved herself to be a pretty capable officer. She was smart. She was strong. She accompanied the team on several away missions. Even took to quoting Starfleet regulations to Captain Kirk in her spare time, or then Admiral Kirk, I should say. She returned in Star Trek III, but this time, instead of being played by Kirstie Alley, was played by Robin Curtis. Star Trek III saw her teaming up with Kirk's son to investigate the newly formed Genesis planet that had come about after the Genesis device was unleashed at the end of Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, and she discovered the reincarnated Spock after he had passed away at the end of the second movie, or was killed in action, I should say. They were taken hostage by the Klingons, where Kirk's son was ultimately killed by them, and she was rescued by Captain Kirk and taken off-world, and they escaped Genesis before it was destroyed. Savick would appear again in Star Trek IV, but her part would be not as big. She was at the beginning on planet Vulcan, and they ultimately left her behind to return to Starfleet because the crew of the Enterprise had to face court-martial for stealing the ship and committing a few other violations of the Prime Directive. There's a lot more to the story, but that's going to lead us calmly to Star Trek VI. So, obviously, they sorted out their issues with Starfleet, were given a ship, and sent back into the universe. Now, Star Trek VI sees the crew of the Enterprise brokering a peace treaty and ending the long-time war with the Federation enemies of the Klingons. And everything's going pretty swimmingly until the Enterprise appears to fire a photon torpedo at the Chancellor's ship, and then a few Starfleet officers beam on board wearing full spacesuits and assassinate the Chancellor. Kirk and McCoy are arrested and put on trial for the assassination, which leaves Spock and the rest of the crew ample time to sort this mystery out. At this time, we're introduced to another new character, Lieutenant Valeris, this time played by Kim Cattrall. Lieutenant Valeris is another young Vulcan officer coming up through the ranks, and just like Savick, she has kind of got the attention of Spock, and now he sees her as possibly the next to take over his spot aboard the Enterprise or aboard another ship. Another shining example of a Vulcan in Starfleet, basically. So during the investigation, it's revealed that there is a conspiracy involving members of Starfleet along with the members of other alien governments, Romulans and Klingons alike, who have all taken to making sure that the war between the Klingons and the Federation never ends. And Valeris ends up being part of this plot as one of the would-be assassins. She's obviously thwarted. They solve the mystery, and the crew is able to come back together, get the people involved in the assassination, and prevent the second assassination, which would have plunged the galaxy into centuries-long war. It was a good movie. It was a really good send-off for the crew of the Enterprise, but being that this was their last movie, but I was always kind of left with this weird, lingering question in my mind, and it's only grown more as I've watched it again in the future, which was why Lieutenant Savick wasn't involved in this movie, and ultimately why she wasn't the assassin. They brought in Lieutenant Valeris, but it really seemed like, to me, she was a stand-in for Savick. Now, it finally bugged me so much after I watched it recently that I went ahead and Googled it, and I did manage to find an article in which they explain that they had originally considered bringing Savick back in this movie, but some of the writers didn't like the idea of turning her story into a traitor, or turning her into a traitor and that being the end of her story. And I have to disagree, and I don't know if other Star Trek fans are going to be on board with me on this, but I'm going to try to make the case. So here we go. Number one, it makes sense. So Lieutenant Savick isn't quite as stoic as other Vulcans that we've met in the past. In fact, she's even seen at Spock's funeral shedding a tear for the loss of her mentor, which is a very un-Vulcan-like thing to do. Now this displays a level of emotion that isn't normally present in the normally emotionless Vulcans, which are just pure logic. And yes, you do see it break through in other Vulcan characters throughout Trek history, but I'm just focusing on Saavik right now. Also, I found out while kind of researching for this video that I guess there was initially a plot line that they was abandoned that was supposed to continue into Star Trek 3 that would reveal that Saavik is actually half Romulan. Her parentage has a Romulan mother and a Romulan father and a Vulcan mother. But that was abandoned because Leonard Nimoy wrote and directed Star Trek 3, and he didn't want to do that story. So it was just kind of abandoned. But that would have been an explanation for her emotions. But I don't even think you need that. So as you see here, like I said before, she showed emotion because she was, at the death of Spock. And then David, Kirk's son, it's alluded in the movie that they're, if anything, at least close friends. If not, maybe even a tad more. At least maybe David wanted to be. I don't know. But it does show that they had a pretty tight relationship. And she had to watch on the planet Genesis as David was murdered in front of her eyes by Klingons while trying to save her. So she has reason to hate Klingons. She has reasons to not trust them at the bare minimum, and certainly not trust a peace treaty with them. You could even hear in the movie when they give her a communicator and she has to tell Kirk that his son is dead, that you hear the break in her voice. She's trying to hold back her emotions again. So that's the second time we've seen the emotions get the better of Saavik. So it would make sense that she would give in to these tendencies and be complicit in a plot like this, because her trust for Klingons is not going to be there, and her better judgment is going to tell her that it's a mistake for the Federation to get too closely involved with them. That brings me to point number 2, which is just the emotional payoff of having Saavik in Star Trek 6. Now, Valeris was a cool character. I liked her a lot. She was played by Kim Cattrall, and Kim Cattrall is pretty much great in everything she's in. She's a great actress. But she's still just a character that we just meet at the beginning of this movie. We have no investment in her. We don't know a lot about her. I mean, she's shown to, again, kind of gain Spock's favor as a pupil, but we're not invested in her like we are with Lieutenant Saavik. Lieutenant Saavik has been around for half the series at this point, and to have her come aboard and end up being the assassin, that's not going to be something that the audience is immediately going to jump into. Whereas with Lieutenant Valeris, you're already kind of looking at her with a side eye. It's like, okay, well, here's the crew that we've known all this time, and then there's a new person who's the traitor here, who's betrayed everybody. That's a little bit broadcast. I mean, they don't do it in the writing. It's just, as an audience member watching a mystery, and everybody is a series regular, and you've got one weird guest star you've never seen before, who's going to be the one to be the bad guy in the end. Lieutenant Saavik would have been a fly under the radar kind of character, because she's a character that a lot of the audience already would have known, would have already had a lot of sympathy for, and the writers could have played on that. They could have subverted her expectation by making her a villain in the end, and she wouldn't have necessarily been a villain. Like I said, a smart assassin or a smart traitor in this case would have been able to use Spock's admiration and trust in her to be able to circumvent his investigation, even sabotage it without him even realizing it, because it would have been very unlikely that Spock would have turned his attention to it. And not to mention the scene later in the movie where he actually has to use the Vulcan mind meld to literally wrench the secrets of the assassination and the conspiracy out of her mind would have been just a gut punch for the audience to have to watch. And a very emotional scene to see Spock having to basically psychically destroy one of his pupils because she's gone so far astray. But at the same time, she would have at least been a bit sympathetic, because what this character has been through. What her history with the Klingons are. What her distrust is bred from. It would have made for a very satisfying story, and I think it would have made for maybe not a happy ending, but it would have made for a good ending for the character. It would have seemed like something in the end that they'd planted seeds for all along. That you would have seen this betrayal when you look back at the whole story. You would have been able to see where it was born, where it comes from, how it festered, and then finally how it manifested in the end of the movie. I think it would have been a great conclusion. I think it would have elevated this movie about another magnitude up in just the kind of pantheon of Star Trek movies, if you're going to rank them from best to worst, I think this would put Star Trek 6 a lot higher than a lot of people would normally have it. That being said, I still really like Star Trek 6. It's probably one of my top 2 or 3 of the original series. Obviously, Wrath of Khan being my favorite, but Star Trek 6 is not that far below it. I think even a casual member of Star Trek should give this one a fan if they haven't already seen it, or the original series, because it really is entertaining. It's a good story. It is a good kind of political thriller, and there's a lot that I haven't spoiled about it, even though I've kind of given a lot away. There's still a lot of intrigue and a lot of neat moments and stuff to uncover in this movie, so it's still worth a watch, even if you hadn't seen it and seen this video. But that was just something that kind of always bugged me about it. And if you're a Star Trek fan, you saw this video, I want to know what you think. Would you have appreciated having Saavik actually come through as the assassin, or would that have ruined her character forever? I think it would have been a satisfying ending for her character, but it would have been a tragic ending, and those are sometimes hard. So let me know in the comments below what you think of my theory, if it holds water, or if it's something that you would support, or if this would have sunk this movie for you in your eyes, if that would have put a stain on this film, if it would have taken a character that was kind of beloved and established from before and put her in that place at the end. Let me know in the comments below. While you're down there, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And this is kind of a weird video. We'll get into more modern entertainment news and things later in the week, but I just wanted to talk about this. So this was something I wanted to get off my chest and wanted to discuss today. So thanks for hanging in there with me. Thanks for talking Trek with me. I don't get to do that often, and I'll talk to you in the next video.